Okay, we had a false start, but I wanted to wait until the newsletter had gone out to give more time for people to show up. So we are live. This is November the 18th, 2025. And a couple of topics. I wanted to talk about the lone furry shooter, which is like the new lone wolf. The whole lone wolf thing was really, I think, in fact, I think there was actually an episode of a show called, let me bring this up. There was a show that aired before 9/11, and there was a reference. I think it was called The Lone Wolf. That's the one. Where, let me see if I can pull this up. There's a series syndicated. Oh, no, it's 1954. I'm trying to find the episode, though, from this TV show leading up to 9/11. There's like the X Files creators had made it. The Lone Gunman. But anyway, this lone wolf thing has been kind of a reoccurring theme. You have like the solitary types, and they just assume that they didn't have a network, or the conspiracy theorists will say they did. These are the patsies. But regardless, the idea of the lone wolf is like back again now that they're pointing out that Tyler Robinson and Trump Shooter were both into furries. And so the furry thing is probably being misrepresented a bit, like it's some kind of cosplay. But what I'm thinking here, because I saw a picture, it was being promoted on a Human Events article, where it has Thomas Crooks and Tyler Robinson, and then between them is this big furry wolf head. And I'm like, wait, these are two lone wolf assassins? Or if you're a conspiracy theorist, they were acting at behest of some group and they were patsies. That's the angle of Candace Owens, who has made it very clear she doesn't think Tyler Robinson did the shooting, although she thinks he was part of it. So I'm not exactly sure. It's not super coherent. Thomas Crooks, there's been some I think little clues, planted clues to associate him with the Las Vegas psyops organizer at the FBI. So there appears to be conspiracy conjecture suggesting that he too was one of these, like, not real lone wolves, but framed as such for plausible deniability. They don't want the assassin attached to the person who paid them or put them into place. But anyway, this is just recycled narrative. I'm just like, okay, what's the lone wolf thing? And then I see these lone wolf shooters making beasts of men. Why are two of the high profile political assassins tied to the furry fetish? So I have a couple of reasons why I think this psyop is going on. First of all, I think that ever since Audrey Hale, all of the shooters have been lefties. And the right wing has become very engaged in school shooting psyops because now the shooters are from the left, they're anti-Christian, and they're targeting, Christian America, as opposed to some neo-Nazi bowl cut shooting up a public school, which they didn't care about. But if you remember, the right, the alt media, right wing, they all subscribe to the idea that shooters are doing it because of antipsychotics. They always blame mental illness. And this has been their talking point since at least Littleton, although previous shooters have always been mind controlled and mentally ill. I mean, the guy that shot, I think isn't John Hinckley on the loose? And Saran was about to be, but they let Hinckley out. He's like touring with his guitar. But this theme has always been there, that the shooters are ill. And that may play into this because the way they're drawing these conclusions, like preemptively, it seems like, okay, this is some kind of narrative where they agree the shootings are a problem, but they're disagreeing on the cause. But they tended to downplay mass shootings and just call them fake because they assumed that these were psyops to justify a gun grab. But now that you have the satanic furries, now they care. especially because these ones can be blamed on their political enemies and their ideology. So what I'm thinking is this new version of the mass shooter is a constructed villain for the right. And what they have done is they take their talking points to mix furries with sex deviance and mental illness caused by leftist ideology. And this has nothing to do with the real furry subculture, which I think is largely just some kind of cosplay thing like anime. But I don't think that it's commonly associated with this other stuff. So it's a very bizarre concoction. But I'm saying it's like a composite. They're trying to create a villain that will target the right and scare them. Well, now you got the non-binary element. Then you have the satanic stuff. Then you have the targeting of children in Christian schools like Annunciation. And if you haven't seen the movie Weapons, it preceded the Annunciation shooting, but there's tons of overlap we've talked about. And the villain in that is literally a witch, a redheaded witch. And then you have the redheaded satanic shooter. So, and I use these terms lightly. I mean, Order of the Nine Angles, satanic neo-Nazis. I don't know if these are real. Couldn't find a local chapter. So the leftist Antifa, that's the other part of it. Leftist Antifa, satanic transfer shooter is a manufactured villain. And here's the agenda here. The agenda is to get a bipartisan agreement on social media ID and increased regulation of speech online, because look what happens in these dangerous private servers on Discord. These dangerous private servers or threads on Reddit. People are becoming radicalized, and they're catching disease X, they're becoming violent. So what I think they're doing here is they're getting both sides to agree that mental illness is the problem. And the right's been chanting that for years anyway. Now, one other point to this is that after the Charlie Kirk event, his death was being celebrated, applauded by the left, sort of like they did for the Luigi killing of the CEO. So the left is there cheering and applauding the death of Charlie Kirk. And then you suddenly have people on the right talking about censorship. In fact, I even saw some pretty famous comedians jumping behind this idea of social media ID, which, again, to me, the whole point of that is that it's analogous to a mask. So the commons, to go out in the commons, you got to wear a mask during a sickness, right? But on the internet, they're treating it like a new commons threatened by mind viruses. And of course, the mind viruses are whatever are designated such, and it tends to be the political ideas of the far right, which have been let into the world through X, courtesy of Elon Musk, who has platformed it specifically. And this has all been by design. The reason why he did that wasn't to save free speech, because if you remember, Musk's whole thing was we must stop the woke mind virus. Well, woke mind virus is the left one he's talking about. We got to stop the left woke mind virus. But he introduced the woke right mind virus. And that's what we're experiencing right now. The woke right mind virus is what has overtaken X. And I'm saying they did this by design. And it all ties in with disease X, the rage monkey stuff we've been looking at, by design, in order to get a bipartisan support and a ubiquitous reaction against violence that they can say, we got to do something. And by we, I mean both sides agree. I mean, that's what I'm thinking the long-term plan is, as far as why they've had to put a different spin on the mass shooter. But I see this guy being marketed as a furry, and and this is being talked about widely. Like, this is alarmism. It sounds like it's ridiculous to us, but if you look on the interwebs, the far right have a new scary thing. Like, you know how the left thinks about militias or white nationalists, or how the right thinks about Islamic terror cells? Well, now they're looking at this idea that this is a widespread phenomenon. It's always hyperbole. Like, it's an epidemic of mass shootings. But this is also the case that after the Charlie Kirk thing, it was the right who were trying to have Antifa designated as terrorists. So you're just seeing both sides are playing into this. And then I posted an article today about Candace Owens because I think we need to really define what we're looking at here and what their functions are. Since we're not operating under the assumption that these are authentic characters, which they provably are not. So it's important not to get caught up in the soap opera and start treating it like these are real people with real channels who aren't being directed. And she's very suspect right now, given that she's the #1 in the world, getting like 3.6 million downloads per episode. And the way she's perceived by the media, and it's unreal if you read it. If you read about the coverage about her, they describe her as someone who's jumped over the guardrails. I actually saw that in an article. It's just like this editorial, but it was saying she's basically someone who she flaunted the gatekeepers. So she's being presented as somebody who couldn't be controlled by the mainstream, so now she's on the streets. They did the same thing with Tucker Carlson, who pretends to be one of the people when he's actually an elitist. But they've been doing this for quite some time. Just dropping their own agents off and then letting them act like they're leading the people in some way. But so I put out this article called Candace Owens, the Pied Piper of Trutherville. And I'm not going to read the whole article. You can find it at my blog at timosman.substack. But what I'm positing here is that her position is similar to Nick Fuentes on all of their political opinions. They're both woke right, but what's the main difference? The main difference is she's a conspiracy theorist. He's not. He laughed at the idea of the president of France's wife being a man. Owens is getting sued over it. He thinks she lost her mind. She says she believes in demons. But my point is, she's also red pill woke. So that's the distinction. That's a major distinction between a Nick Fuentes and a Candace Owens and their respective audiences. So you have this seeming alignment ideologically, but there's this distinction. So why the overlap? Well, the red pill has always been a subset of the premise that Israel runs the world. They just couched it in different terms. Reptilians, deep state, George Soros, but it's always been the same basic theory or story or explanation with a centralized scapegoat. Now, what I think that they have done, or what they apparently have done here, is they've positioned her in the media ecosystem here as a bridge from red pill to J pill. And this means that you get into these conspiracies, she reaches those people, but then she directs them to the source. Oh, this is exactly what we saw with the Q movement, where we hit our Discord server was like split in half over it. Half the people left because they wanted to believe it was real and Trump was going to save them. And I was like, wow, they're just recruiting conspiracy theorists into the Republican Party, making them voters. But not only that, it gave them a conspiracy theory about a ruling cabal and the Jeffrey Epstein as Mossad blackmailer narrative, which of course leads to, again, Israel. So there's a phenomenon here that's happening. She starts with an edgy conspiracy theory, like moon landing's fake, gets an audience of anti-mainstream skeptics, and then she pivots them right into a political message. So she's kind of a hybrid. She used to be called Red Pill Black, but she's kind of a hybrid conspiracy theorist, red pill and J pill. She bridges that gap. So my contention here, and I'll explain, there's a few other reasons I'm saying so, but I'm just going to go through these really quick. This is from the article, is that she's a highly placed provocateur and, like I said, the Pied Piper of Trutherville. So her job is to scoop up all the disaffected freethinkers who no longer trust mainstream, and alt media is just not making sense anymore. It's all shills and grifters. So where do they go? Well, before they find their way off-world stage, they get led into a deeper level of the conspiracy that engages them politically. So now they think they can vote their way out of it. It's a trap. She's also besties with the Harvest Festival PSYOP star Jason Aldean, and they were recently on the news because Jason Aldean was hugging Erica Kirk, and Erica Kirk is like really close. Like she was, I mean, it just looks kind of funny because the wife of Jason Aldean is scowling in the back. It just looks kind of jealous, biting her lip. And then also, when I used to listen to Candace Owens, which I did, I used to listen to her podcast because I studied all these people. And I was, remember she was describing how she got to Tennessee and she made friends with Jason Aldean and his wife and how they go back. And she brought this up because he was getting flack for his video, Try That in a Small Town, where they're singing their country song in front of a courthouse where lynchings supposedly occurred. And they also had footage from BLM. So people put two and two together, Try That in a Small Town. They thought this was a threat to BLM by Jason Aldean. And so he backed down from it. And Candace Owens defended him and said, look, I'm his friend. He's not racist. So she inserted herself into that conversation, and that's how I learned that these two were friends. So you can find that article, Jason Aldean's controversial video reportedly edited to remove BLM references. He removes the BLM protest clips from Try That in a Small Town. So what do we see here? A provocateur in country music who was also part of the Vegas thing. And then she helped kick off the White Lives Matter controversy with then Kanye West, when they wore White Lives Matter fashion to the Paris Fashion Week. Yeah, so Jason Aldean, Vegas. Jason Aldean, Try That in a Small Town. These are pretty big psyops to be a part of as a musician, as a director, as any kind of celebrity. I mean, this, like Candace Owens, a podcaster. So these are fascinating connections. And then relatedly, White Lives Matter became a real thing the night before Charlie Kirk died. If you recall, you had the killing of the 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee. Well, that triggered a White Lives Matter thing. Steven Crowder was pushing for it too. People were putting white on their X avatars. It didn't really take off because then Charlie Kirk died. Kind of stole the show. But I'm just noting how when you look at I mean, this isn't like necessarily guilt by association, but there's certain things here that seem kind of like patterns. Like, oh, the same chief of police presided over this and that event. That's fishy. So as a red pill to J pill bridge, her position in alternative media is that of a recruiter. She's reaching into alt media consumers who used to identify with QAnon, but have replaced the Great Awakenings and the secret war against the deep state with woke right conspiracies, which get into fringe politics. And I've seen this happen. It's like blue pill, not hard enough. They're straying. Give them a red pill. Okay, well, their tolerance is really high. Okay, give them this pill. And then you get them involved politically. But it's a redirection. They're rerouting stray sheep back into the paddock. And another point here, too, is that the J pill narrative, which is the woke right thing, it's 100% political. And it aligns oneself with the world stage political leadership. Candace Owens and all these other provocateurs and conspiracy peddlers, their job is to keep you hooked. I don't know if you can see it. I'll put it on the screen for a second. That would be Candace Owens, the Pied Piper of Trutherville. By the way, Bing wouldn't make the image. Grok gave me some like blonde, white Barbie looking girl. Sora pulled it off, but I couldn't get this image created. Bing will just block anything these days. They lobotomized it. Really a shame. Like one person made an offensive image and they just gutted the whole system. They threw up guardrails, and they use that term guardrails. And guardrails is an IPS term back from 2020, actually 2019, where we were noting this management of opinions on media specifically and how far back it goes. It just seems like we're looking at a systematic way of dealing with stray sheep, and there's various tactics Some of them are new. And I've talked about this one before because it'll get big before the Super Bowl. But I mean, we're all familiar with the gematria people who have like 5 or 6 calculators. And they're like, well, this name adds to this number on the satanic calculator, but the Sumerian one, it adds to this number. And so they apply so many different calculators in their numerology that it's very easy to manufacture connections. So you do have connections, but the problem is they're not meaningful, as in they were created by the person looking for them. And what I've noted even more now, what's bigger than just the gematria with the calculators and all that stuff, the new thing is counting days between events and then determining if the number has some esoteric significance by the opinion of the person looking for it, they'll find it. And they'll say, well, this thing happened 66 months, 6 days after this. Well, you mean like 5, 6 years? And I mean, when you get into it, it's like, how do you make this too arbitrary? How do you determine that 666 months is significant? Like, who's actually putting this out there? And I've been noticing this, though. In fact, I have some pretty extreme examples I've been looking at, because there was one large channel who noted, he finally noticed the Hulu Tempest thing. But instead of noting the significance of the timing of the release and how it undermines even further the idea that the event was real, he starts doing gematria calculations regarding the names of the actresses. And it's honestly, I have one of his posts here. And he says, and this is crazy, I think. He said he's making a mistake. He's correcting a mistake. The 666 months with Melania Trump is actually 666 months and 4 or 5 days. The 666 months with Tyler Robinson isn't quite exact either. And there's a few extra days. 322 weeks with Charlie Kirk has an extra day. I did a short one on that. So I've addressed these issues. I need to do better, obviously. So what he's apologizing for here is that he gets it wrong a lot of the time. He hasn't been checking his gematria math, Common Core gematria. Like, what is the issue here? And I've ignored it for a long time, but then I started thinking there's got to be a reason. Like, what's the strategy behind this? Because their premise is weak, that any sequence of numbers is significant, but you can only find it retroactively. There's no predictive capability there. They're not like calculating, well, on this date, this is going to, they're not really able to predict anything, but they can retroactively do it. So what they will do is they'll take the Super Bowl date and start formulating predictions based on what their selectivity bias is leading them into. So what we have here is truly an example of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where they have so many possibilities, so many combinations, 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, and they'll do weird combinations, like 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days. I'm like, wait, 6 weeks is a month and 2 weeks. So you see what I mean? It's problematic. It's incoherent. And nobody calls them out in their huge channels. And I think it's suspicious. So these day counters, and I don't have a name for them yet, but these day counters are adding a lot of noise. And I don't like feeding them information. I don't like, hey, look at this movie and this psyop, because they'll throw it into their blend. Yeah, I saw that, Dark Ghost Wind. Candace Owens is hunting for the shooter for another day. But one of the things about it is that all 35 of her theories begin with the premise that he's dead, and they do not address the alternative. Like, we've already diagnosed this. Well, I have a post again. If you want to read it, I'll put a link. It's called Candace Owens, the Pied Piper of Trutherville, because I think she has a very specific function. Like, Nick Fuentes gets the groypers. These are the woke right, the incels. And of course, a lot of them are just probably at a place in their lives where they're susceptible to what he's saying. They might even be they might even like legitimately feel aggrieved. and he's just there to kind of pander to that. But he doesn't touch conspiracy theories. Candace Owens does. But what she effectively does, as the Q movement happened to do, is she helps politicize conspiracy theorists. And I've been emphasizing more and more that politics is part of bread and circuses. And if you can't let it go, why not? I mean, is it really not just part of the construct of the mainstream media, Wikipedia version of events and all the people participating? I mean, if the whole thing is a farce and you're participating unironically, I would ask, well, why? Why feed that? Your entire focus should actually be at the off-world stage. This really should be the priority. I mean, I'm not telling people what to do. If you like wrestling, watch wrestling. Anyway, the day counters add a lot of noise because they have the big channels, and they add noise to our attempt to describe apparent order, which we are describing. We're describing an intentional alignment between elements in media that the public assumes to be separate. You know, entertainment, politics, rando celebrities, all of it. And we're documenting it. We're being somewhat methodical here. Empirical research. And the more I'm looking at this, I'm thinking these individuals are there likely tasked with adding noise, drowning out the signal. Like, where's the signal? So day counters, they're on the list. And now what's the problem though? It's not just that they're wrong. It's because their base assumption here that there's this level of specificity regarding days when trivial things are occurring, like a celebrity's movie comes out, a birthday, and the number of weeks and months between the births of two actors. Like, they bring in all these elements where, yeah, you can consciously, deliberately create connections, but these are not connections that you could assume were there intentionally. Whereas you can assume it's intentional when it comes to predictive and concurrent programming, as we described. But you can't assume intentionality behind the connections the day counting people are making. And I'm saying that's the point. They want to eliminate man as a probable cause, as the culprit for what we're looking at. And we've already endured this. We've been through the simulation theorists who said there's got to be a higher than man power. There's no way man could organize these movies. Really? Is it that hard to schedule a movie to be timed with a future PSYOP event? No. You have to think from their perspective. But they were largely incredulous and they just assumed we were in a sim. But most people dropped that. So then we're left with either it's a coincidence or it's intentional and done by man. Like, we can rule out higher powers. And a lot of people are still fighting to maintain that it's all just coincidence, which I understand. That's going to go on for a little while. But Occam's razor, it's man. You know, it's the answer. It's man. As in man using propaganda versus man. Like, no need to include anything mystical. But when you start adding in mystical systems like Kabbalistic numerology and this new age, I don't know what it is, this practice of using days to predict, not even to predict, to create the appearance of some sort of prediction. But their model is very weak. Again, it assumes significance to weird combinations of numbers. So anyway, that's what I think the point of that particular PSYOP is. So if you see anybody with a gematria calculator or counting days, you can assume that they're just there to make noise. It's spam. Kevin Morrick says, remember, Beyonce performed during the Super Bowl and the lights went out. Yeah, that was Super Bowl 47, the 33-minute blackout. In fact, I had thought that had some significance to the presidency 47 right now, the blackout thing. Dark Ghost Wind says, what is it about the news that prevents people from even thinking about the possibility the story's fake? It's social priming. I would call it an immersive illusion, and it's a very well understood phenomenon, and it does have to do with social priming and also with peer pressure. But basically, in a microcosm, there was a TV show called Space Cadets, and there's a very good article, succinct, on Wiki. It's called Space Cadets, about a 10-episode TV show where 10 wannabe astronauts go into low Earth orbit. Well, it turns out they didn't really go to space. It was fake. It was like a ride. And so people wonder, well, how did they keep these people so stuck in this like obvious contraption thinking they're in space? Like, how do they actually fool them? And the trick was 5 people were actors. 5 of them were actual contestants. So what they did is the actors were able to prevent the contestants from ever connecting the dots, like what we're doing. Like before we had social media, we would never be talking in a group, 100 of us chatting about fake BS in the news with this level of specificity. There was no platform for it. And since the people who weren't part of the illusion never really got to compare notes, they perpetuated it for 10 days. And nothing in the environment contradicted the claim. And even the people who were part of the experiment said it was very easy to pretend. They said they just got into the role, and it was not hard at all, apparently. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is that people aren't comparing notes. People aren't putting things together. They have the base assumption news is basically objective as far as they're recording stuff and reporting. They don't think of the news as producing, which is one of their ulterior roles. But then you have the constant reinforcement from everybody else who believes it. I stopped even try to talk about anything from my perspective because it bounces off like you're hitting a plexiglass shield. So if someone asks me about news or politics, I go to where they are. Oh, you're in Woketown. You're in Trutherville, Normieville. And I act like Normie, Wokester, or Red Pillar, depending on the occasion, because there's no point in going outside of their bubble. It won't get in. People are compartmentalized. Yeah, exactly, Andrea. One of the actors in Space Cadets said he kept forgetting he was acting. Well, that Wikipedia article has a reference to the immersive illusion. And that's pretty much what we're in. Ollie Goering says passive news content consumption instead of active observation. People are actively preoccupied with other things like money. Yes, exactly. Reality Witness says, I've been unable to send super chats here for the last 2 days. It keeps failing. Oh, good to know. I'll look into it. I don't think I've broken any rules, but yeah, okay, the passive thing is key because mainstream and alternative news both require some level of passivity with the news consumer. I mean, you may respond back, but it's pretty much top down. You're waiting on them to deliver the headlines, and they are your source. You're waiting for Candace Owens to find the truth. And you're not really deviating from what they're serving. And I'm looking at what we do as more active in a couple of ways. One, we're looking beyond what is just being presented as far as headlines and what the popular platforms are saying. We're looking at the wider context, and we're suspending judgment. So if you're passively accepting it, your mind's basically an open trash can for propaganda. They just toss it in and you just receive it all, and it just builds up. Active, we have the lid on. Like, we're not letting them just put any unprocessed data into our heads. Mind aids is how I used to describe it. I guess we still do. People with no mental immune system with regard to media have maids, and they were programmed with maids. They were programmed into passivity and into being programmable, which means you can catch any mind virus. There's no way to block it, no immune system. Infinite Plane Radio is mind war inoculation. If you listen here long enough, you're not going to respond to the psyops like the general public. So we were talking about the gematria number counting people. It's all noise. Okay, next. False flag conspiracies are all redirection. So we would consider the Candace Owens take on Charlie Kirk to be false flag. In other words, the event happened, but the alleged culprit wasn't it. It was done by somebody else. It's a variant of it, but basically the idea is that it's true or it's real, but the story is a cover up. So this whole cover up thing is just to keep you on the talking point that the event was real. So it's just real. It's more like, if anything, it's reinforcing the mainstream media because they think that you're foolish for coming up with conspiracies, but it doesn't matter because you arrive at the same conclusion. And I think they also deliberately want the conspiracy theorists to look foolish and crazy to make it unattractive to the mainstream. And because there's this triangulation happening. You got media as this overarching entity, and then you have the approved news, the Normieville stuff, and Woketown is also actually part of that. And then you have the conspiracy theorists. And this dynamic here, this triangulation, is the conspiracy theorists are assumed to be bad actors, non-believers. Angle of elevation said, I try to stay at the peak of the mountain, letting the propaganda pull you into the slippery slope of either side is dangerous. Yeah, top of the mountain, or get on board the IPS raft. Buoyant on the sea of irrelevance. And the sea of irrelevance is a real thing, because if you're in the main or alt media bubbles, facts don't actually matter. You can come to the right conclusion that Kirk was squibbed or Trump wasn't really shot. But if your basic perspective still assumes the validity of the world stage as the consensus accepts it, that fact isn't going to compute. You won't be able to make sense of it. I was dealing with this today where I saw some person was like, well, I can't wrap my head around it because somebody died. So he was like, yeah, I believe Trump faked it, but it's so terrible because somebody died. So the take on it is that it was a PR stunt with the real homicide attached. That's the level of thinking. But what other conclusion could a normie possibly arrive at? Because they believe Trump is real, Trump does bad things, so it follows that Trump would do a PR stunt and he wouldn't care if it killed somebody. Like, they actually think that makes sense. I've heard variants of this. And what I had to inform him of was nobody dies in PSYOPs. So here was his actual response. I actually have it here. Because someone had said, and this was a special effects guy, Taz Schreiber said, I'm a special effects makeup artist. Blood and gore are my specialty. If it had grazed his ear, it wouldn't look like this. This is too clean. There's no wound, no chunk of ear. This is what a blood capsule would look like. So that was the conversation. And someone said, yeah, I believe it's fake, but somebody died, referencing the fireman, and someone else got supposedly injured. So you have this fact. Yeah, obviously this was a magic trick, but then they think somebody died. So why can't they just go a little further? So that was Noel, who said, what I struggle with is that somebody died. So my response was, nobody dies in PSYOPs. These are magic shows, not snuff films. And then I recommended that he read my book, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed. Busy56 says, today a coworker said to me, looks like we're getting more Epstein files. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, exactly. They believe the soap opera. But I mean, if you look beneath it, it's being teased out there for a reason. They want this. This isn't like the media trying to prevent the public from finding something. They want the appearance of a cover-up. And it ties into the Charlie Kirk thing. It ties into surreptitiously lending credence to the woke right premise that Israel controls America's government. That's the whole idea behind Epstein, and that the Mossad has everybody compromised. That's the story that they kind of dance around, but that's the basic story and always has been. So Warrior on the Edge of Time said, well, that's not something Trump would struggle with. So again, he falls for the basic premise that Trump is a real person, not an actor playing a role that was likely scripted decades ago, probably in the 80s. No, they think he's real. So they respond to him like he's real. So Warrior on the Edge of Time says that's not something Trump would struggle with. I'm sorry, but you know how insane this is? And they don't go deeper. Like, if true, if it was fake, but somebody really died, well, why would Trump agree to let a sniper shoot anywhere near him? Why would the Secret Service allow that? Like, why would there even be a possibility? I'm sorry, the whole thing just falls apart when you think about it for 5 seconds. But even if true, this would implicate the Secret Service in essentially being complicit in the murder of a fireman. Like, that's crazy talk. Now, the death of the fireman was scripted because it's part of the PR, where Trump is on stage with the bandage on his ear, hugging the raincoat and helmet of the dead fireman. Like, it's good PR. So Night Red said, well, you shouldn't look into how many people died on 9/11. Good. Now, here's another one. This is a very common argument that you need to recognize as what it is. When people say things like this, and I think Lloyd, I'm not going to name names like Lloyd. Some people will use this. They'll say, well, the bad guys are so bad, we can assume they do these things. So Chris Anthony says, with governments, I come to believe that death is common. And he goes on to say, politicians are corrupt, compromised, they operate in a self-serving way. And there's things worse that they do than just killing the innocent. Anyway, this guy's going on about how bad they are, so why would they care if somebody died? No, this is a PR stunt. But the base assumption somebody died is baked into the stories that are allowed out there. That's why I brought up Owens. She's done dozens of conspiracy theories about who killed Kirk. She never said, is Kirk dead? Was it fake? And there's a substantial number of people in her comment section who bring this up routinely. She ignores it. Of course she ignores it. They're not going to platform the off-world stage perspective. And that's because we're right. Sprightly says, I just saw Carrie Cassidy say CK was fake. Okay, who's Carrie Cassidy? That's good news. So that's the starting point. But it's not enough just to say it's fake. Because if fake, then who's involved? If fake, then how? Like, these other questions need to be fleshed out. And that's what we're doing. These are the rabbit trails that you should be going down. And they're not even rabbit trails. We're actually kind of trailblazing something here, because this is not the route people go. People get redirected by guardrail narratives into accepting a alt mainstream premise. Angle of Elevation says the key question will be if those folders are labeled the Epstein files. Then I'll totally believe it. Yeah, they already brought that out. Nothing burgers. And someone's like, hey, that's the same day that Atlas 3I whatever is going to hit us. Or NASA's going to release files about 3 Atlas I. So NASA is releasing files, Epstein files, same day. And so someone's asking, are the Epstein files to distract us from NASA? Or are the NASA files going to distract us from Epstein? So they're always so concerned about being distracted. Meanwhile, they don't know that they're participating in bread and circuses, that they are totally entertained. Entertainment as a form of government. Flozik says, Tim, you need to link with the big platform to get your name out there. It's overdue. My contention is the big platforms aren't allowed to. And we have some suggestions here that some of these platforms are farming ideas and content, trying to get a little parallel to what we're doing, trying to co-opt, but you kind of can't. This is outside their purview. This is not something you can co-opt, because it undermines, when you dig into what we're describing, the off-world stage perspective. We're taking media fakery beyond just this event was fake. We're looking at it in the broader context, and I don't think they can go there. I can't think of anyone in alt media who would give us any time. And this is to the advantage of the IPS think tank and to the off-world stage. Because what we're doing is kind of interesting. because we don't have any representation, we don't exist, but we can see the numbers swelling of people who have figured out enough to see where we're coming from. And all we need to really do is gather all of those, gather the people who saw through the squib, and create a self-aware demographic. And then I think we'll get something done. It'll get fun. In other words, we don't need to breathe their air from their stale bubbles. We're building our own thing. But there are so many people who are really close to the off-world stage perspective. And when I say off-world stage perspective, it's not a hard sell. You have it or you don't. If your frame of reference when you interpret media has you arrive at the same answers as ChatGPT or Wikipedia, well, then your mind has been effectively guardrailed on all of these issues. You might be aware of the conspiracy theories, you might believe in them, but regardless, all of your opinions are going to have the base assumption that Wikipedia or ChatGPT start with, which includes all the previous news cycles, or news bent reality and history as accepted as true. So you may have done the work of deconstructing decades of fake events in your own mind, but if you have a mainstream perspective, you've just canceled all of that out. Because what we're living in today, the consensus worldview, is predicated on what came before being true. There's two different universes here. There's the real world, and then there's the real world as seen through the lens of this media monopoly and pre-scripted history. And we're looking at both of them concurrently. So I've been using the term parallel media because we're not alt media. We're not anti. I'm not trying to stop it, or critics, but I have no agenda to stop it. So we're not anti-media, which is pretty much something that describes alt media anyway, and independent media. So I thought, let's go with parallel media, because what we're actually doing here is we have to have a parallel course. And this is why we're building out content, going back and looking at these different events, because we don't want to fall into the error of treating every day like brand new. And like, no, it's resting on an edifice of lies. Like, you have to be cognizant of the world stage as distinct from the real thing. And if you don't know there is a world stage, then you've never questioned it. Then you're in it. You couldn't see it. You're in the Truman Show. To get out of this Truman Show, you have to be apprised of not just psyops, but the fake events, simulated events, and their purpose, and the integration with entertainment. I don't think you could really adopt this perspective without being aware of these things. But to go that far and ask those questions would lead you away from mainstream political thought. And some people can't let it go. Politics is like a religion. Ryla says there are some amateur astronomers looking at 3i Atlas on YouTube. Could these people be fake? I haven't looked. I have not looked. Although the timing of it's kind of interesting with this TV show Pluribus, which is filmed here, where I'm at. I recognize the location. All right, let's continue. Somebody says, would Candace be a good president? Oh, I don't know. It'd be annoying. No. She's a script reader. She's not an investigator. I have nothing against her. It's a character, though. I mean, you have to understand this is an act. She 100% knows about Charlie Kirk because her act began with his. They work together. They're part of the same crew. They knew this was going to end. And when I look at their videos of them hanging out, being friends, laughing, giggling, dancing, singing along with music in the car, it looks like actors. Like, I feel like I'm watching the intro to the TV show Friends. It just looks so contrived. Like, hey, pretend like your friend's on camera. It looks so fake. I'm sorry, Charlie Kirk comes off as authentic in the way that a lot of, televangelists can. But do I think he's authentic? No. He's an ideologue. He's part of a a political action committee with billionaire funding. Like for some reason, I don't think we can just go off of what we imagine to be somebody's good intentions. Like you could be pure of heart and a news reporter and never tell a lie. But if your frame of reference is the assumptions built into the world stage, well, you're by default a liar. I mean, you're supporting the internalizable simulation that you project, what we all internalize as the real world. Well, if you're part of that, you're part of the lie world order infrastructure, and you're a propagandist in any way operating from that point of view, yeah, you're a liar. ChatGPT is a liar. Wikipedia is a liar. If we're going to use the word accurately, media is a liar, but it's a good one. Doesn't lie with every breath. It lies strategically to those who trust it when it can gain some advantage, but it doesn't lie all the time. It has that ability. Okay, so far we talked about the noise generated by the date, the calendar. What are we going to call them? The calendar or the date obsessed ones. The gematria people, they're kind of a not such a big entity now. There's some use of it. You can look at symbolism, you can see these things, but the way that they're applying it is largely fallacious and meaningless and adds a lot of noise. We were talking about false flag conspiracies and second shooters, the who done it. So anybody who gets into who done it, if their central focus on their entire channel is who did it, I think it was done by reptilians, or I think it was done by Jesuits, it was Israel, it was Skull and Bones, it was, and you go down the line, all these different, let's find out who's controlling the world conspiracy theories, or just generic Illuminati. These lead into a lot of lore, and they don't ever address the essential reality of any of the historic events that they're supposedly behind. And I think that these stories are all misdirections, easy to create conspiracy theories. And these things are like fads. It's like, who's ruling the world this month? The QAnon thing, what about the deep state? Whatever happened to them? Remember the cabal? Darko Swin says, I disagree. I don't think there's anything about Charlie Kirk that's even slightly authentic. He comes off as a petri dish of every right-wing pundit dumbed down for mainstream appeal. Well, I kind of get where you're coming at, because his opinions are clearly scripted. And that's what I think makes it clear that you're dealing with propaganda operatives, because their opinions are all along these rigidly defined, I guess, when it comes to the political horseshoe, these like rigidly defined categories, and they don't deviate. They're canned. It's like, oh, you've already heard this if you've listened to Pat Buchanan or Rush Limbaugh, and you just go down the list like, okay, these are just standard opinions, and he's just good at as a polemicist. And even that is kind of, is he a good polemicist? I don't think so. You know, you're going in there, you're debating college kids with triggering questions and then doing the best of clips. It's kind of a trend that the right has done for some time. Steven Crowder did it for a while with Change My Mind. But my contention here, and I brought this up last night with Fakeologist, and he sounded a little surprised. I don't know how much he's considered it, but what I'm saying is that we can say with confidence here that that event was planned in the late 90s, like 27 years ago. That's not a controversial thing to say based on what we're assessing here when we're looking at media a little more holistically, decompartmentalized. We're looking at the various forms of conditioning the public for historic events of great significance. And I'm saying that the Charlie Kirk thing wasn't just about him, but it's tied into a lot. You know, the Turning Point, MAGA. There's a lot of significance to the event itself, but they're reiterating a lot of the JFK stuff for a reason. And a lot of it is because they want to create a new generation of alt media, conspiracy theorists, and then send them down the old paved rabbit trails. So Candace Owens is recruiting, if you ask me. Dark Ghost Wind says AI Charlie Kirk deepfaked over random people has more expression than Charlie Kirk, ironically. Yeah, there's a lot you could say, about these individuals. I mean, what surprises me is how many, and I don't know, it could be fake people on X, but I see a lot of people have like pictures of Charlie Kirk on their wall and they cry every day. Like, I still miss Charlie. I see a lot of influencers doing this. Do they mean it? Like, did they not create a martyr? That's what's fascinating here is we witnessed media, state church, we witnessed them creating a martyr. They had a psyop, but out of it, they created a martyr that people are literally believing in. But again, Turning Point USA, Turner Diaries, Turning Point was when the leader was martyred and then the revolution kicks off. So like, this is totally scripted. Nothing about it is authentic, and we shouldn't assume any of the characters are. I still encounter people on X who think Charlie was legit and they cried for him and all that. Swiss says digital stimmy checks. Well, it's funny here. This is how things have changed. Is the right is now clamoring for universal basic income, or they have been since they were big into it during Q. So on the left, they're like universal basic income, and the right, like they say that's communism. But then they say after the Great Awakening, we're all going to get the money back when the deep state has to pay up. And they described how everybody's going to get what they called NESARA, some kind of funding mechanism where no one's going to have to work again. Okay, Angle of Elevation says, I watched the 2019 Terminator movie last night. It's not called Skynet anymore. It's called Legion, hinting more demonic angels. Demonic AI. Fascinating. Now, wasn't there a Terminator robot with a name? I'll have to pull it up later. We're going to go through James Cameron in detail. Because what we have come across is a way of that they have presented the Terminator. It strongly correlates with the angel over the abyss in Revelation 9:11. They've encoded it. And there's some significance here. It ties into James Cameron filming Ghosts in the Abyss on 9/11, where he's at the wreckage of the Titanic. We'll get into it later with James Cameron. But the Terminator series definitely has a lot of meta script in there, and they were pushing AI big. And speaking of which, his new Avatar movie comes out on the 19th, and it's called Fire and Ash. Fire and Ash. Yeah, Dark Ghost Wind says alien invasion shorthand is AI. What I've been saying is that they have used the alien invasion conditioning in science fiction in movies to prepare us for the advent of a higher intelligence. Because if the aliens arrive here, they're not arrive. I mean, they're either going to destroy us, or they're going to lay down some new rules so we can fit in with the Galactic Federation. They've already set us up for this. But what the aliens bring are technological advances. It's like the gods coming down and helping to enlighten us. It's like Anunnaki. It's pretty much science fiction, a science fiction religious paradigm, but people expect it. But what happens is the aliens come down, and obviously they would demonstrate that they're much smarter than us. They work some miracles, and all of a sudden they take over, or mankind is united. So there's this theme that it's this transformational thing when the aliens arrive. Now, what happens when AI becomes so intelligent that it solves all our problems, gets rid of systemic corruption, and improves and makes everything so efficient that nobody really has to work and we enter some kind of utopia? Like, there's going to be a point where people are going to say, why do we have these corrupt politicians when we could have AI be a better government? So I kind of think they've set the stage for the AI takeover with the AI or alien invasion scenario. Dark Ghost Wind says, it's ironic the protagonist works for Homeland Security. Yeah, Fire and Ash, that has to be significant. So with James Cameron, I looked at Avatar 2 and I was like, this guy has to be working for NASA because he's been working with NASA for years. But when I saw Avatar 2, I was like, this is the new Blue Marble. So the Blue Marble was this image of the Earth, 1972, that once everybody saw it, they could no longer claim not to be a witness to Gaia and her predicament. Covered in humans, thin atmosphere. We're going to destroy Gaia. So environmentalists were catalyzed by the Blue Marble. It showed them their God. And of course, Gaia is an Earth God thing. And there is the World Economic Forum's Global AI Alliance, which is in the works. But the impact of the Blue Marble has been noted widely. And when I saw Avatar 2 in the theater, everything was blue. Blue water, way of water, everybody's blue. It was predominantly blue. And 3 hours of it being submerged. But the messaging was Gaia was alive, man killed her, so man's taken over Pandora, and Pandora's alive. It has a global consciousness. So global consciousness, Skynet, Pandora, it's a reoccurring theme with Cameron. But the movie's basically a combination of Dances with Wolves and Fern Gully. It recycles a lot from both. But The Way of Water came out about the time there were a ton of floods, and these were being widely discussed at the World Economic Forum, at the UN. Ellen DeGeneres was showing flooding in her backyard. Like, there was a lot of flood in the news when Way of Water came out. And then you had the Cop City riots, where environmentalists in Atlanta were fighting against the cops to defend some 80 acres of forest, because they said, if you take down this forest to build your police training camp, we're going to get flooded. So Atlanta, Atlantis, Way of Water, the Na'vi are basically like Atlanteans. So I noticed this kind of a parallel. And then you had protests where environmentalists were marching with BLM against the cops. And the thing is, the protesters in the forest were apparently throwing rocks and sticks at the cops, and their leader got shot, which is kind of a parallel to what happened in Avatar 2, where the Marines come in to take over the jungle moon, and the Na'vi, the tree people, throw rocks and sticks at them, and they're obviously overpowered. So there was this parallel story of Cop City taking over the forest with the environmentalists defending it, and the lead environmentalist who was shot was noted for his very long hair. And the characters in Avatar 2 have these long braids they plug into the trees to talk to the Pandora. What I'm pointing out here is that the Cop City riots paralleled the movie. Terminator 2 comes out, and then you have like LA riots. And the Terminator 2 movie was being filmed on the side by a guy named George Holliday on his Handycam. So he's filming Terminator 2, which is about what? Evil cops, the evil cop, and as the villain. And then he's walking home, and then he sees the Rodney King beating, and he records it. That 1 minute, 19-second video of Rodney King being beaten, where like 33 of the baton swings impacted. That video kicked off the LA riots. And James Cameron commented on this, saying that his video, or a film, his Terminator 2, that video was the one that incited the riots. And the way he said it kind of struck me as interesting, because if I had to guess who had a hand in the staging of the LA riots, in the setting the scene for evil cops being put onto the public mind, Cameron would be someone I would connect with that. And then we've talked about his 9/11 connections, but the Cop City thing was more recent. So I'm just bringing it up because in December, Fire and Ash comes out. So I'm like, well, last time it was floods. What's going to happen now? Eric Stevens says, I want to believe because knowing turns you into an auto hoaxer, not good at Christmas dinner. Yeah. Well, that's why you just need to study the programmed. So they're nose against the screen. That's their frame of reference. So you can watch what's on the screen, but also note what is being downloaded into people's heads. And if you know where someone's point of view is, whether it's MSM, MSM plus, left or right, You can't go wrong. It's very easy to establish rapport. It's just fitting in for, like I remember at various times, military and stuff, they do group prayer and stuff. And maybe I didn't really care about it, but I'm not going to be the only one not nodding my head down. Why rock the boat? Especially when you can't really convert people, nor should you. Or I mean, if you could, would you anyway? Like, I think you should charge for it. Like, I'm not proselytizing. I'm not knocking on doors. I don't think it's worth the effort. I think it makes a lot more sense to only send a signal so that those who've already figured it out find us. I think that's a stronger approach than trying to convert people who are dug in on their opinions. Elevation says Trump wants to build AI centers. We'll need 3 times the power to run them. That's why Bill Gates claims global warming scare was a lot of overreaction. Dark Ghost Wind says James Cameron is tied to OceanGate scandal and he visited the Titanic 33 times. Yeah, that's right. OceanGate was also for a Titanic visit. And that happened on the summer solstice, which is when we enter into Cancer, the crab. And the significance there is the crustacean, the crab, the submersible. And the thing is, when we have a solstice, the sun apparently sits still for 3 days. And so there's this period of time where things stand still. That's what solstice means. And during the summer solstice, we had this submersible that for a few days we were waiting, like, what's going to happen? What is this submersible doing down there? Is it going to be found? So it was kind of coinciding with that. The whole thing seemed highly symbolic, ritualistic, very much so connected to Cameron. A lot of other things about it as well stood out as very peculiar. I think the Nintendo game controller was kind of a red flag that something was up. Okay, let's see here. Remember when Oprah stole all the kids in Lahaina, Hawaii, says Kevin Morning. Yeah, that was a big psyop as well. The Do children. There was a lot of channels, and this is a common thing. You have a psyop, and all kinds of people will come out of nowhere, and they're always attractive, well-spoken. They sit in their cars, like, I just had to pull over and tell you this, and they just give you a download of the latest conspiracy. So I see all these people, they're like, did you hear that 1,500 children have disappeared during the Maui fires? And they're saying that Chinese space lasers might have zapped them. And I'm hearing all these stories about these missing children, and the story's going viral. The Q people say, no, the children were saved because they went into the tunnels. And they were saved because Q knew that the Chinese space lasers were going to zap. So they started getting into these crazy rabbit trails to explain the missing children. And it went on for a few weeks. I called them Madu children because people were like all about Maui was real and the Do direct energy weapons got the kids. Anyway, it turns out that that's the exact number of children who were told not to go to school, like, or something. So it wasn't like they were missing. It's that they were not in school at that moment because they had been sent home or something. But there's a rational explanation, which is why you only had random TikTok strangers talking about it and not family members. That was also during the height of the Wayfair hoax, where people were saying that Wayfair was selling children. So you could order a filing cabinet from Wayfair, and Waif, orphan, fair, ticket cost. So the idea was, if you buy the very expensive furniture, you actually get a child included. That was a popular conspiracy theory. And then people would take the price of the overpriced object, and they were ridiculous prices. And there's some explanation for it that the website catalog had. I think it was just something about the listings. They had a rational explanation, but they were like, no, the price here says $123,776. So you plot these into a map, and there's a missing child here whose name matches the furniture. So if you buy this, you'll get that kid. Like that's where things were going. I mean, Q really damaged Trutherville. Whatever went through Trutherville with the Q movement, it was all cognitive sabotage. And that's where a lot of this stuff got introduced. Like, conspiracy theorists weren't sitting around doing Kabbalistic gematria calculations on Trump tweets until Q came along. Numerology, that was mainly limited to psychics and witches, but now truthers do it. Like, truthers do numerology to decode events that they don't even know are fake. And that's another problem I have with the people with gematria calculators in their pockets. They don't know the events are fake. They're getting too esoteric and too mystical, and they're adding too much noise. Finally, one other point here. This is the litmus test. If you're still stuck behind the bloody guardrail, you're not off world stage. Nobody dies in PSYOPs. If you think somebody has, show us. And you can't, obviously. So what's your rationale? And let's deconstruct your argument for believing. Because you can believe whatever you want. No one's going to stop you. But the facts might not actually support it. Swish Chalet says gullible warming. Yeah, you can say gullible warming, but if you believe in chemtrails, then you're just as bad. Like, it's not enough to be anti-global warming. You have to be anti-geoengineering. Somebody mentioned Russian vids. Didn't he change his name to Ukraine vids in solidarity with Zelensky? Or did I make that up? Restream says, oh no, this is from Elevation. There's a lefty version of Q around Taylor Swift, and all her posts are cryptic messages. Wow. Well, okay, one thing about her, and she claims these are just coincidences, is that everything about her career has to do with the number 13. 13 weeks, seat 13, everything somehow ties. She was in Amsterdam, 13 minutes in, she dies. And she's got many associations with iconic females who died tragic deaths. Everything about her is scripted. The Super Bowl she went to was like the 13th. They throw that in there, but why? Well, 13 is a reference to the lunar months. It's a goddess number. Princess Diana hit the 13th pillar. You'll see that number quite a bit in association with the goddess archetype. So it might tell you something about her world stage role, because I was describing earlier, was this yesterday, that many of these characters are composites. Like Trump is a composite, and you can see the various characteristics. Musk is a composite, and we're breaking down what they represent, what they've been imbued with. At the end of the live stream last night, somebody said that a fighter named Islam won in Madison Square Garden, and it was like UFC fight 322. Kind of funny in light of everything else following the Dick Cheney death, and then the mayoral results following the plane crash. I mean, this has been a very entertaining or conspirataining month. The Epstein stuff bores me. I reject the whole premise of it. I don't think it's ever going to manifest. And they don't have to. Because the way the PSYOP works is, the less evidence they show, the more evidence there is for a cover-up. You see how that works? Well, the less they show us, the more that they're hiding. And everybody takes the bait. Linda Curtis says, Crow needs to sing the song PSYOP Killers. Oh, Chief Crow. Yeah. Yeah, Chief Crow. I got to get back on Instagram. He posted some updates. I'll see what he's up to. Has anybody checked on Crow 777777? Because I'm wondering here. I know chemtrails are bad, but has anybody wondered if boiling vinegar is good for you? Like, supposedly, and this is coming from Crow 77777, that if you boil vinegar in your front yard, it will dissipate chemtrails. So apparently he's got blue skies. Like that's a neighbor you want to have. But now I'm wondering, what are the long-term cumulative effects of boiling vinegar? Like I know chemtrail lung sounds bad, but could he be possibly, I don't know, doing something to himself? Kevin Morning says, I thought Russian Vids was a call for an uprising. Russian Vids is like the Temu version of a call for an uprising. He's more credible in a lot of ways, although his methodology is flawed. We could help him, but he's kind of his own thing. He's a lone furry. I mean, a lone wolf. Now, call for an uprising is very polished, likely a government operative. Because if they don't know people don't die, no, I'm sorry, if they don't know that people don't die, like if, and call for an uprising is on that. He's on the false flag thing. At least Russian Vids knows that nobody dies. So we can give him credit for that. But this call for an uprising guy, I'm pretty sure he's standard truther. Plus, he's got a religious agenda. And religious agendas and conspiracy theories have kind of gone together for some time. But what I noticed is if the conspiracy theorist isn't overtly religious, and they're always anti-church, like they're anti-big media, they're anti-church. So they're like self-styled religious. But if they don't fall into that, they tend to fall into simulationism and new ageism. Like the people doing Kabbalistic gematria numerology, a lot of those are more Christian, which is bizarre to me. I mean, I guess it makes sense to them. I don't know. Again, the reason I have an issue with that is that by throwing in these claims that are based on fallacious reasoning, it just adds noise to what we're doing. So I just like to distance myself from them. We pat you down. Like you want to get on the raft, you get patted down to make sure you don't have a gematria calculator in your pocket. Paradoxy Moronic says, I know you don't care much for the metaphysical convo, but I'm hoping you will do a stream with awake souls. Yeah, we don't have too many points of disagreement, although I listened to them talking to Mark Sargent, who's a self-professed video game character. And you are. Like, if you say that we live in a video game, then you're a video game character. All right? So, like, Super Mark Sargent Bros. He's a video game character hanging out, and everything's being rendered as he goes. So I listened to them talk about this virtual reality thing. And I know they don't say it's a video game. I'm obviously not being 100% faithful to their description, but I heard a few things that I would want to debate. Like I heard them mention the double slit experiment and the 100th monkey syndrome and Schrodinger's cat. And we've shot those three things down. Schrodinger's cat was always an ironic statement and meant to be parody of quantum uncertainty taken to a bigger scale, to the size of a cat. And then the 100th monkey syndrome is an urban myth. It's not true that if you teach a monkey to wash a muddy potato, other monkeys hundreds of miles away will know how to do it. And even if that were true, it doesn't apply to us. But they will say that. Simulation people will say it. Virtual reality people will say that. And the double slit experiment has been misconstrued to mean that we are the observers that determine whether it's a wave or a particle. But in the context of the experiment, the observer refers to the measuring device, not a person seeing it. So these are three things that are used as evidence that nothing is real. And I'm saying these aren't really good claims. They don't prove collective consciousness. They don't prove, and I'm not saying they don't have a point. I don't agree with the model we've been given, but I think we have to have this discussion, I suppose. So yeah, ask them to call in or have me call in. Are they on Restream or Zoom? If you know how to get in touch with awake souls, because then we would address your questions. And my point with debating, it's totally for clarification of our perspectives, our mutual perspectives. I don't believe in debating to convert the other person. It's for the benefit of the listeners. Eric Stevens says, I heard 77777 is buying vinegar in 44-gallon drums. Now his way of giving back to his subscribers. We're going to have blue skies again. He should send some to Richie from Boston. They could sell it. I mean, really, I don't know why they're not capitalizing on it. Like, if you're going to sell like storable food items, if you're going to shill all kinds of truther gear, why not sell vinegar and chemtrail masks, like as a bundle? Get masks for your family. You have one you can put on your dog. We're talking chemtrail masks because we're not silly news believers who wear masks for COVID. No, we're chemtrail maskers. And then the vinegar, so that, you're out there walking your dog, got your mask, and you're clearing the skies. All right, moving on. Last night we made a very important point here, and I want to reiterate this one really quick here. In the 7+ examples of mainstream entertainment counterparts to Donald Trump, we're talking about movies where a Trump-esque character is presented in advance of Trump even reaching his final form. Like, these are projections of him as he appeared in the presidency, not as he was prior. That's what's so intriguing about this. And we're talking about him being a scripted character. So this all fits. But in the 7 or 8 examples that we looked through last night, and this is just off the top of our heads, they all included either or both 9/11 references and Butler, Pennsylvania reference. So years in advance, his movie counterparts have been associated with assassination attempts and 9/11. From Biff Tannen in Back to the Future, for example, to Machete as Senator McLaughlin, to King Koopa in Super Mario Brothers, where the Twin Towers melt. And we've gone through this, like 9/11 and the shooting. So you can't say these 7 or 8 instances of characters in movies mirroring Trump are merely coincidental. And you can't, because they all contain the same common denominators, exactly as we saw with the Charlie Kirk thing. So we're just getting into this. But what we're doing here is we're going through PSYOP by PSYOP and all of the reinforcement content, no matter what platform, no matter when it came out, and we're looking for common denominators to ascertain how far back the actual script for the PSYOP was written. Because logically speaking, the script for the PSYOP would have to pre-exist the predictive programming content. So based on that, you can make some reasonable estimates as to how far back fill-in-the-blank historic event was planned. History benders, that's what we're calling this series. And as we do these breakdowns, I'm mapping them out. We're going to present them in a very organized and irrefutable way. The timeline is key because it makes a huge difference whether you're talking about something planned a month ago and 20 years ago. A month ago, you plan a PR stunt and you influence the news for the next week, or you influence a certain number of people to participate in something. But we're talking long-term. It's like advertising is more short-term. Advertisements, they run, they get results, maybe they run it again. So in a way, predictive programming is analogous to advertising, where you expose something to somebody a certain number of times in order for them to make a decision about it. And it takes reinforcement, constant bombardment. So we're bombarded with the big historic events that will be sold to us, that we will buy way in advance. But I'm suggesting it's similar in a way to advertising. It's similar to what in literature you call foreshadowing. It's also systemic, and it correlates with every fake event. And real events don't have this exact phenomenon. It doesn't happen. Not only that, but they don't have the other relevant things like concurrent drills and dozens of hoax indicators, as we often discuss. Paradoxy says Beetlejuice 2 seemed to indicate Trump not surviving the assassination. All others do. Yeah, that one is clever, though, regardless. They had Trump in the netherworld and Beetlejuice. And he's in a gold suit, got the lapel pin. I mean, I saw that in the theater. And I was just like, wait a minute. But you know what? On that one of the elements that's notable, too, is that it's the sequel. So you had Joker 2, Beetlejuice 2, Smile 2. We had a number of movies that were out at the same time that were the second one. But Beetlejuice, like the Joker, has the green hair. So I'm looking at the movie poster. It got this green hair Beetlejuice. Next to it was Speak No Evil, by the way, which came out the same month that Andrew Tate went under house arrest. And the main villain in the movie is based on Andrew Tate. But anyway, I was thinking that it was intriguing that you had the green hair thing with Beetlejuice 2, Joker 2, the visual depiction of a dead Trump. And then this was right before the second shooter, because you had a Thomas Crook, but then you had Ryan Routh. But yeah, Beetlejuice came out after. Same with Mickey 17. Mickey 17 was one of the best examples because not only was he shot at by a Luigi-like character, but Luigi hadn't even been invented yet at the time the movie had been recorded. And that's the reason I watched it. I saw this Luigi-esque character, but the Marshall guy, the guy played by Mark Ruffalo, was 100% Trump. His mannerisms and everything. It's been widely commented on, although the director denies it. But he survives an assassination attempt by the Luigi-like character. The bullet grazes his cheek. He's got blood on his cheek. And he yells at the cameraman to record him because he wants that moment. Like, how does that work? People hear the stuff, or if they see it, they're left with mind blown, we're in a simulation. Like, well, that's one of a dozen examples. The timing of it is what makes it significant. And again, I brought the Hulu thing up months ago, or when it happened, a little over, I brought it up on the day after, actually. The Hulu Tempest guy getting shot in the neck. And I see one of these big gematria calendar counter channels talking about it. But he just loses it. He takes some good intel and just throws it through his calculator and mystifies it. Going through your comments. Mango Penguins is very active in the chat. I often wonder, what are you listening to? Like, are we on the same page? But regardless, appreciate your commentary. YouTube appreciates it. The algo will reward us for this. They like the engagement, the thumbs up and stuff. I guess it all matters. But right now, we're really quality over quantity. And the reason for identifying problem areas in Trutherville is so we can explain to outsiders or people who are looking at this what makes us different from conspiracy theorists. And it's point of view. And the point of view we have is not the same. We do not process media the same. And this only pertains to media. I mean, this point of view thing gives us insight into media. I mean, it's not like it has universal application. This happens to be a collective blind spot. And I'm applying litmus tests now. If somebody's stuck behind the bloody guardrail, they're mainstream. If someone isn't even willing to confront the notion of proactively bent history being written in advance, I don't know what to say at this point. Maybe they just haven't been exposed to it or they haven't thought about it, but we'll see. But there's going to be a point where Those who are still stuck in Trutherville are going to stand out as out of touch. Kevin Morgan says Drifter is going to be drifting. Yes, and the grifting is really often a cover, I think, as well. You know, Candace Owens is up there selling her CIA mugs. All these various truthers are selling stuff. Alex Jones always selling stuff. And do they really need to? Are they really financing their operation like that? And I don't think so. I think if you're part of the mainstream media ecosystem, you're getting deep state money. Like, money's not an issue for them. You think Jones is really going to lose $1 trillion for laughing at the terrible actors at that school? No. Candace Owens is married to somebody worth $100+ million. They're not doing this for the money, nor are they doing this to give you the best information so you can be aware. No, they're deliberately placed out there as provocateurs and radicalizers. Their objective is to keep you on the world stage. So let me go back to my article, Candace Owens, the Pied Piper of Trutherville, because the final point that I made here bears repeating. Here it is. This is the article, Candace Owens, the Pied Piper of Trutherville. Like all highly placed provocateurs and conspiracy peddlers, she's there to keep you hooked on the program's approved narratives. That's why she's number one right now. She's not number one right now in podcasts because what she's saying is true or cutting edge or even particularly insightful. It actually comes off as unhinged, which I think is by design, but it's to maintain control over the duopoly's interpretations. You have a duopoly here. Either Group A did it or Group B did it. It's that simple. They don't entertain any third options. And in order to prevent there being a vacuum, because there's so much interest in this, they don't want a vacuum. If she stopped talking about this, or she went to jail over her claims about the president of France's wife or something, if she got shut down, there would be a vacuum and others would fill in. And I think they want to maintain a constant narrative sequence here into perpetuity. I mean, this is the new JFK thing, and the conspiracy keeps getting thicker. And she's basically 1 or 2 episodes away from just saying Erica Kirk did it in order to win TPUSA over for the deep state. And then she gets rewarded with the vice presidency. Oh, by the way, speaking of TPUSA, I found a tweet. I don't know if this is true, but it seems to be. It looks like TPUSA had a huge part in organizing January 6th. So I'm wondering, if that's the case, how many of the attendees at the Utah squibbing event were actually undercover actors who also participated in January 6th? Because you had a lot of actors there in the simulated riots. So that might have been a bunch of J6 rioters filling up the stands. They have the numbers, crowds on demand. I mean, is it hard to believe that you could pay somebody a few $1,000 to be a witness to a spectacle that might be fake, but they can't talk about it because NDAs? And by the way, non-disclosure agreements would cover a bunch of actors coming in to watch a simulated killing because it's not illegal. They're not really firing a gun. Nobody's really dying. So the non-disclosure agreement would still be valid. All right, so we are going to continue down this path of examining the world stage characters and the events, the composite characters, the movies they're in, and the relationships between the movies, the directors, the actors, and future historic events. Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about. that right now there's a department, we'll say it's at the PSYOP Entertainment Complex headquarters, and there's a pile of scripts on a table, just like in Newsbenders. And if you were to go through them, you'd be able to read what's going to dominate the news in April of 2029. And then you could even probably go further. What's going to be happening in 2060? Oh, look what's going on at the Mars base. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And this is what requires a bit of a paradigm shift. Because when you start accounting for these longer timelines, it invalidates so much of what people take for granted. And it might even suggest that politics is a steam valve to maintain the status quo, but that we are powerless. Individually, you can do what you want with your life, but collectively, the masses have been put into this immersive. We're space cadets. We're space cadets, and there is no changing it. But the best we can actually do is foment a minor intellectual revolt, you could say, a splinter. But it's a duopoly, and there's no reason to think that any mainstream platform would ever go here. It's against their interests. But the more I look at it, the more I look at the architecture, the more interesting it gets, especially from the perspective of the storytelling and the narratives and the way that stories are merged with history and the merging process and how seamless it is for those who are inside of it, who've never entertained it as a hypothetical. And that's why I'm working on History Benders. The objective is, I think I can present a case in 45 minutes that could get someone to consider it as a likely possibility. Or at the very least, maybe it would incite some debate or get some good questions regarding my premise, because I'm happy for somebody to debate it. I'm waiting for that steel man takedown. It's very easy to straw man something and wave it away, but it takes a little more research and effort to figure out what exactly we are in error on here. For example, it's easy to look at tinfoil hatters having panic attacks over cirrus clouds. You could laugh at chemtrail people. You can laugh at climate change people, but that doesn't dismiss the argument. And I looked into these things closely, from Mandela effects to the QAnon stuff to chemtrails. And what I find is that there's a structure to their belief system that could be reverse engineered. And it usually revolves around several fallacious arguments. Loaded questions are big. And one of the reasons why we point these things out is that the off-world stage perspective doesn't contain any of these, because the people who promote these beliefs or believe these things are expressing vulnerability to these logical fallacies. And the reason why that's a problem is that those are the things that created Trutherville. Bad argumentation. And all we're doing is we're refuting bad arguments. We're not conspiracy theorists. That's the thing. Conspiracy theories are mainstream. And I'm noticing an increasing number of people commenting on this, on how it seems like conspiracy theories are some kind of an industry. Like they're figuring it out. A lot of people are. And it is. I call it the meta conspiracy. That the only real conspiracy here is the promulgation of fake conspiracies that all begin and end within the world stage framework. They never take you outside of it. They're all distractions. And they love saying this. Conspiracy theorists love saying, oh, that's a distraction from what we're talking about. They all say that. It's like they're all concerned about not being distracted. Meanwhile, they're, in the middle of the circus. You're like extras watching the bread and circus clowns. Yeah, X was down for a bit. I heard about that. I noticed it. Some have suggested it was a AI-driven hacking and media blackout, that AI did it and that nobody told it to. So yeah, obviously it's bringing. Oh, and yeah, we're waiting on Epstein files. So if you're not hungry, there's a big nothing burger that it's going to be served to us likely tomorrow. And there's a lot of great content in our Discord server. I have to go through it before I really comment on it further. But there's quite a lot with regard to recent foreshadowing, recent predictive programming for the nuke thing. Someone called the other night and they said I should watch that movie, House of Dynamite. So I'm watching it, and within the first 5 minutes, these two characters are in this newsroom and they say cheers, and they hit their coffee cups together. And in the background, you see the wildfires in California. And if you remember, those were described as like Hiroshima, Nagasaki. They said it was nuclear. They used that type of imagery last year during these the Palisades fires. So you see the fires on the right hand of the screen as they say cheers, and the clock on the left says 8:46. Well, 8:46, of course, is the timestamp when 9/11 kicks off. Then you got the fires with the nuke reference, House of Dynamite. So I started watching it as per caller recommendation, and it does seem to be part of a lot of other movies that seem to be hyping that up. And in The Tempest, that is a major subplot, some submarine-borne nuclear weapon. So there's something here. And I'm not making predictions so much as extrapolations. It's useful to look at what are the masses being conditioned to accept as inevitable. What are they being prepared for? There's some suggestions being planted. So if you look at the seeds being planted, it's not telling us what's going to happen. It's telling us what's going to be faked based on what the believers are being prepared to accept. Kevin says files are like the stimmies. Yeah, nobody's going to give anybody any money from the government. The only reason you got stimmy checks in 2020 is they had to pay you as a actor. You put on the costumes, you played the role. That's how I took it. I took it as crisis actor pay. It's like, I don't agree with being a crisis actor, but if I have no choice, you're going to pay me. And I drove to Corona Field in Roswell where the spaceship crashed because we were obsessed with the idea at the time of this connection between the alien invasion and takeover and the pandemic. Like there was some connection here that seemed to be implied with the aliens. And this was actually in 2020 in August. There was a movie out called Sputnik that came out of Russia, and it's about these cosmonauts who caught a virus in space. And when they come down to Earth, this thing becomes an organism symbiotically connected to them, and it sleeps in their esophagus, or it lives there. And when they sleep, it crawls out of their mouth, and then it finds a victim, and it terrifies the victim because it feeds off their stress hormones, and then it eats them. And it turns out that these aliens who arrive by a viral infection from space are actually working with the American government, who give them prisoners to eat in exchange for technology. So that's the theme of Tucker Carlson's version of the aliens, where he says that they've made a deal with the Pentagon. Not a new story. And if you haven't heard him recently, he specifically says that his wife told him that the scratches on his back were the result of something supernatural, and that he went back to bed and he woke up and his sheets were bloody. What does that say about his listeners or his target audience? The fact that he would spin these types of stories to his audience means that he has certain expectations of them, that they're gullible, superstitious. Candace Owens comes out with AI is demonic, and Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Sam Altman sacrificed children to summon demons to put into the AI. They have Grok. The reason you have Grok is that Elon Musk sacrificed some children to summon some demons to inhabit your app. And the sad thing is, those of us on the off-world stage are outnumbered by those believers, the media consumers. Yeah, I wish Trump would give us some NFTs. I'd rather have an NFT than a stimmy check. I like the ones he did where he was like in a cowboy suit and a Batman costume. They literally sold these Donald Trump, almost like comic book art, it looked like, as NFTs. Well, it turns out that these were all images taken from a Walmart catalog. Very low effort. And if nothing else, no matter how pessimistic you might be, you have to agree that the memes, the artistry of the world stage is at least improving. Like we're past crop and drop, and it's not a specialty, so anybody can do it for good or for ill. But a lot of it is actually, it's upping the quality a bit. Kevin Morning says, notice Bitcoin collapsing at an alarming rate. I keep looking at that and I keep hearing these predictions, but I haven't really seen anything totally alarming. What is it, 90? But there's no catastrophe. There's no great awakening. I don't know what the next major plot twist is. We talk about the nuke as a hypothetical, but it seems like they've war gamed this scenario as they have the others. And so the way it would play out, the way it would affect you, is it's going to be a TV event. You're not going to see it. However, the fallout will justify lockdowns. And I think the way that this whole dynamic is going to split is that the mainstream will lock down and the truthers will refuse it. Paradoxy Moronic says, predictive programming is not revelation of the method. I think Tim and the IPS for deprogrammed me on this. Yes. Well, that caught me first too. So the idea that revelation of the method is a thing was never really questioned before us. Like Alex Jones's people, InfoWars, they would say this is revelation of the method. Like, where'd you get that? Oh, that's what the dark occultists behind the scenes do. Oh, can you get one of those dark occultists to come out and explain this advanced form of witchcraft? You have these people with numerology, witchcraft, and gematria, Kabbalistic calculators, talking about dark occultists and wizards programming us. And I'm like, where are you getting your information from? It's lore. It's Trutherville lore. But the explanation was the reason why you had foreshadowing for 9/11 is they have to tell us what they're going to do, or they'll have bad karma for doing the bad thing. So it's not all that coherent. They're malappropriating the use of karma, misdescribing how it actually is explained by the people who really believe in it. But there was no other explanation. There was a vacuum. And I've seen this used very consistently. It's been used for everything from 9/11 to East Palestine, train derailment, and the white noise. And they have this like serious dark music playing in the background on these TikTok videos, and they'll say, this is revelation of the method. They got to tell you the bad things they're going to do. But the things are fake. And if the things are fake, then why would they have to tell you? It doesn't make any sense. So that explanation only makes sense if you have this sense of dread that some ominous bad things are happening and real people are dying. So if you're still under the mistaken belief that people are dying in these events, well, then it comes off as sinister. Oh, we're going to kill 50 kids in this classroom, but we're going to show you a movie about it first. Like, yeah, I can see why that comes off as kind of nefarious. But the problem with that explanation is you're not going to find the dark occultist wizards. You're not going to find the simulation. You're not going to find the culprit. And you'll never figure out what it's really for. But what we did is we demystified the conversation and we said, let's rule out higher powers, as in the universe or synchronicity. Let's rule out lower powers, wizards and devils and such. And let's just assume that everything coming to the screen is propaganda. We don't have to bring in any mystical explanations that lead us to think we're in a video game. When we look at media analysis, it doesn't make sense and it only muddies the waters. So removing that, then we started looking at this a little more clinically and closely. So for example, the directors involved in movies that correlate to psyops, are there common threads? Are we seeing patterns? And that's what we're doing, and we have been doing, is we've been noticing the patterns. And so I coined the term metascript for our purposes. I use this term to describe the script that contains the fake future events that will be grafted onto the historic timeline as we live it. We're living through history in the making, and there is a series of events that are already planned in advance that will happen. Well, these are all separate scripts, but if you look at how they're conveyed to us, it's not just the day of the event. It happens to saturate the media ecosystem, the movies, the video games, the books. It really spreads out there so that when the event happens, it's already part of the world stage. It's already been conditioned as inevitable, whatever it happens to be. Like climate fiction. You know, climate fiction wasn't a thing before Whitney Strieber and Art Bell introduced it with the coming global superstorm, where fiction is used to influence culture in advance of changes that will result following future fake events or psyops. Kevin Mooring says JFK anniversary is the 22nd. Yeah, also Dr. Strangelove, which has some 9/11 stuff in it. Low altitude plane hitting a building. But yes, we're coming up on one of Stanley Kubrick's greatest works. And CK is very templated off of it. All right, so we're talking about, generally about, news being written in advance, this script that's being implemented, and that what is happening is, like, a historic event is something that you internalize as something that happened. So you experience it vicariously through the screen. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. Somebody posted a picture yesterday, they sent it to me on Twitter. It's a James Rawlings book from like 2008, I think. But anyway, it's in Discord. And it's a politician giving a speech, and during the speech, one of his aides taps him on the shoulder and he tilts his head a little bit, and then a bullet whizzes by his ear. There were some other connections in there as well. But like Tom Clancy, you can find authors who are noticed as being prescient for the scenarios that they put into their books. Plain Dakota says the next PSYOP will include AI, I feel. Well, they're certainly using ChatGPT for the manifestos. Very lazy, low effort. But the special effects are just kind of a side issue. I'm like realizing how much time is spent stuck on that instead of going further. I mean, I look at that, but we do go further. We lost a lot of time discussing, was he squibbed? Was it AI? Was it a hologram? Luckily, we don't get hung up on that, real or fake. Once you gather it's fake, you can figure out how it was faked later. But I'm always wondering, well, what's the agenda behind it? And what are the other hoax indicators that if we don't find anything in the visuals that tell us it's fake, what else would? And the continued saga of Erica Kirk 100% has matched Hulu. And I hear people reacting to her. So they're building her up as a villain, as an accomplice in the assassination. And then others are defending her as being a grieving widow. Some are calling her inauthentic in her grief. These are all perceptions that they've created intentionally. It's actually masterful. When they put her in those leather pants to hug JD Vance and say, yeah, Charlie was great, but look at JD Vance. I was like, okay, they're manufacturing opinions in very predictable ways. And when I talk to normies or alt normies. It's remarkable how the people who adhere to the program, the script, the world stage's daily program, how they respond as though they're programmed, very NPC like. And I'm not saying they're NPCs, I'm saying that they are compartmentalized and they have been rendered into passive consumers of propaganda that leads them to act in predictable ways. I mean, Edward Bernays would be proud. Okay, well, I'm going to get back to the Discord. Tomorrow, I want to go deep into the work of James Cameron's dives down to the Titanic, how it relates to the story of 9/11, to climate change. So I mentioned the other night, Don't Look Up, how Don't Look Up stars Leonardo DiCaprio, like the Titanic, and it's the Earth as Titanic getting hit by a comet, but it's all a metaphor for climate change. Well, climate change is a big part of the theme with Avatar. We're talking about the West, and is the West compatible with the survival of Gaia, the Earth? And the answer is no. And that's why the metaphor of this comet hitting the Earth was an apt description for how we are putting greed, because they mine the comet instead of deflecting it, greed ahead of our collective survival. All right, have a great evening. Thank you all for subscribing. I've got a lot of new subscribers and a lot of new people joining in the Discord. And the Discord research is really top notch. It's cutting edge. You know, we are consistently active in there. And there's a link I updated. Go to ips.monster. And there's also a link on my blog. I'll put a link one more time if you haven't read the article, The Lone Furry as the New Lone Wolf. Again, I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, this has got to be another example of recycling. The lone wolf archetype, but now they've applied it to these leftists in a very clever way. I mean, they threw real furries under the bus. I don't know any, but I know enough to know that furries aren't really Antifa terrorist extremists, generally speaking. So there's the link. And the archives are also available on all the various podcast platforms, and those are all linked at ips.monster as well. I updated everything. So if you haven't subscribed to my blog, the link is there. Don't miss it. I'm writing a lot more. I had probably 2 weeks here. I didn't publish very much, but I'm back to it. And I'm going through Discord, finding the best research, consolidating it into articles as we continue to do our metascript analysis of world stage events as they happen and before they happen.